Hope everybody's doing well. It's a beautiful Sabbath day. I was thinking it might be a little more dreary, but looks like it might turn out to be nice. I don't know. Hopefully. It's pretty cool. If you wouldn't mind praying with me this morning before we open God's Word. Heavenly Father, we appreciate the opportunity to be here together worshiping. A body of believers interested in finding out more about you. Not so that we can be smarter, but so that we can be more useful. So that we can be better understood when it comes to being a Christian and a disciple and a follower of you. Lord, be with us today, and as we dive into an interesting subject, I ask that you'd give us clarity, and that if we have questions, you would point us to the answers that draw us to a better understanding of who you are. In your name, amen. From time to time, my mind wanders. I don't know about you guys, but even in conversation, even if somebody's sharing something very deep with me, and I'm kind of locked in eyes to eyes, my mind will sometimes still be going in other directions. And I apologize if I've ever done that to you. It's not a proud moment, but it does happen. And I think we all know how that happens, though, how our mind attaches one thing to the next. For instance, my wife and I will sometimes be driving in the car, and a conversation might ensue that sounds like this. Well, where do you want to eat? Oh, I don't know. Where do you want to eat? Well, I don't know. Are you in the mood for Mexican? No. Well, what do you want? Well, anything's fine. No. Okay. So finally you decide on a place. How about Panera Bread? Sounds like a good place. So the conversation will kind of come to a point right there, and the wife and I will agree, and she will say, yeah, Panera Bread. Panera Bread sounds good. And I'll say, yeah, I love Panera Bread. I love that Mediterranean sandwich they have and a bread bowl of broccoli cheddar soup. 4, 5, 6. Man, I love Atlanta, Georgia. Now, Julie is not good at hiding her facial expression, so she will look at me like, what? Hold on, how are these related? And so then she'll ask me, and fellas, or even ladies sometimes, I'm sure that when somebody says, like, how did you get from where we were right now to whatever you just said? How did you get there? There are times when I'm actually embarrassed to give the chain of thought process as to how I got there. You know what I'm saying? Those are the times when most of us will leave out portions of the story. But, you know, she says we want to go to Panera. I love Panera. And I think, man, I love it because I get to go to Panera and they have all you can drink soda. I just love drinking soda. But if you drink a lot of sugar, sometimes it affects your ability to like heal yourself. And you know, other people, they drink coffee. I wonder if coffee's bad for you when you drink coffee. Does that affect, like, does it have a lot of sugar in it? I just can't stand coffee, but I do like hot chocolate. Hot chocolate is good, but the last time I drank hot chocolate, it burnt my mouth and created a sore in my mouth. And you know what? I hate it when I get a sore in my mouth because once you bite that spot, it's sore for like a week. There's nothing you can do. I mean, it just hangs on and hangs on and hangs on. One time I was in Underground, and I got a sore like that. I ran into the kiosk or a little display case of one of those hat racks in a Lids when I was in Underground Atlanta, and that sore lasted for like 2 or 3 years. Man, I love Atlanta, Georgia. That all made sense, right? We do that in our own minds, but we also do that in conversation. From time to time, we sit around and talk. And one of my favorite places to sit around and talk, one of the favorite places to do that, I mean, seemingly just flawlessly, where you start to transition from thing to thing to thing with different little segues that may or may not make sense, is around the campfire. You guys ever spend some time around a campfire, just talking up till all hours of the morning? Just the crackling of the fire. I think we have one here today. Oh, there it is. Uh-oh. Oh, that's all we got. Conversation over. It's almost like the campfire, you feed the campfire so that the campfire can feed you more stuff to talk about. And from time to time, you get into some pretty deep subjects around the campfire. It's not all fluffy stuff, you know? Some of it's, what are you doing? Where have you been? Especially if you're going camping with a group of friends you haven't seen for a while. Suddenly you're engaged in kind of fluffy conversation, but then it's deep, like, yeah, I mean, things just didn't go well, or, yeah, my grandma passed away. You start to get into like real deep conversations. And then you start to try to fix the world in these conversations, you know what I mean? We give advice. So Christians, we give some interesting advice to one another about God around the campfire, I'm sure. But the campfire is this place where deep conversations take place. I don't want to focus too much on the campfire. I just wanted to have a campfire up here while we talked about some deep stuff today. But I want us to launch into a conversation that is, it's an interesting one. Because especially when you work with people who are trying to figure out who they are, who they're becoming, who God is in their lives, deep questions like suffering come up. I don't know if you've ever been sitting around the campfire, you launch into a subject like suffering. Why do good things happen to seemingly rotten people? Why do bad things happen to some of the sweetest people you have ever met in your life? It's a big question, and it's something that I wasn't sure I understood very well for a long time. In fact, it's the type of subject that I sort of stayed away from because I didn't understand it real well. And I found that subject in this book called Job. Are you familiar with Job? Now, you don't have to show a show of hands. I don't know how many people here have ever read the whole book of Job, but it's an entertaining book. And it reminds me of what a campfire talk might be like. I mean, they're just talking in circles and saying some of the same things over and over again and sharing opinions and arguing. And they're mad and sarcastic and poking fun at one another. It's an interesting thing. But they're there, like many of us might be, talking and discovering what their beliefs are about suffering, about the nature of suffering in our lives. And so I want to hit some highlights. If you guys wouldn't mind opening the script with me to Job. And we're going to kind of do almost like a little bit of an outline of a portion of the book here, rather than dive into each verse. And so even if you brought a pen or a pencil or something like that, and you kind of wanted to write down like the sections that we talk about, you can go back and look at it later and see what it says to you and how it spoke to you. What I love about the Bible is two people can read the same verse and it says vastly different things to them about the message that God has for their lives. But here in Job 1:1, you find that Job is going to get his bona fides. What qualifies Job to be the kind of guy who can talk about pain and suffering, and especially the understanding of why a good person would go through suffering? So here it is. It says, in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. He had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. Now, don't get me wrong. It does seem like he was a great man, right? It says he was blameless. It says he was a good guy. He was upright. And he had all this stuff to admire him by. What a successful, nice guy. But he takes it to the next level. His niceness doesn't stop with just being blameless and upright and good to God. His sons used to take turns, verse 4, holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of fasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Job was so worried about his own children, he would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned. They have cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. This guy is obsessed with the people he loves and their well-being. He doesn't want the people he loves, even though they might be making poor decisions, he doesn't want suffering to fall upon them. So he takes it on himself to make penance for them, to fight for them, to stand up for them. Well, then the story goes on. Here we find out about this blameless man who's not only just a good guy, but he takes it to the next level. He is so worried about other people. And so what happens to him? One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came with them. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Well, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on the earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Now, I want you to know I used to stay away from this book because as I read this portion, and it even does that again here in a couple moments, we'll see that, I just thought to myself, now here are a couple of people having a conversation about what seemingly has nothing to do with Job. And God just out of the blue says, "Satan, here's this guy. What we've been talking about, nothing to do with him, but I'm just going to point him out. Throw him right under the bus, and not like a regular yellow bus, like a big touring bus. Right under the bus." Why would God do that? This is something I couldn't understand. This question of suffering. Well, then you start to dig into some other things. You start to dig into other questions, not just in the book of Job, but you have to start to look into the Bible. What is God's hand in suffering? What is his role in suffering? Is the God that we know as a God of love a God of suffering? I have a hard time balancing that in my mind. Anybody else here? If we were to sit around the fire right now and start talking about this, would some of us maybe start getting worked up a little bit? Our heart, like, yeah, wait a second. It doesn't make any sense. So we take a look at other areas. In Isaiah, Isaiah 5:13, there is an indication that God's people will be led into exile. Little caption here in Isaiah 5, right above 5:8. Mine says, "Woes and judgments." So some warnings and some things that are going to happen. We start here, maybe verse 11. "Woe to those who rise early in the morning to run after their drinks, who stay up late at night till they are inflamed with wine. They have harps and lyres, and their banquets have tambourines and flutes and wine, but they have no regard for the deeds of the Lord." These are people that are living a pretty risky life. I mean, if you had to ask me, it seems like they're not real responsible people. So then it says, "Therefore my people will go into exile." Now, does it say by God's hand? I don't know. We have to read here. It says, "Therefore my people will go into exile for lack of understanding. Their men of rank will die of hunger, and their masses will be parched with thirst." The people will go in exile. Now, I don't know if God sets this up as a natural consequence in here as I'm reading this. Is it fair to ask the question, well, if we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, sometimes God just puts us in a miserable situation so that we realize what we're doing? I don't know. I do know that when I see people who make poor choices have to deal with poor consequences, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. But then what about Job? Job is not a guy who was making poor choices. Job is not a guy, and so here it goes. Back to Job, the story reads on. Satan replies to God, Does Job fear God for nothing? Is he a blameless and upright guy because just that's who he is? Satan replied, have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hand, so that his flocks and herds are spread through the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. I'll tell you what, once our quality of life and our comfort zone are in question, it is true, we start to see a different side of people. Those things that are somehow very important to us, and maybe some of them are, but some things we may look at another person and say, wow, why are you so bent out of shape about that? But we start to see another side of people as what they're used to in life is questioned. And Satan makes this point. He'll curse you to your face. So the Lord said to Satan, very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Come on, God. You throw Job right under the bus and then give Satan permission to just, drag him right through the mud, just in every way possible. And then we continue to read on. One day, Job's sons and daughters were feasting. Verse 13. The bad news comes that there was an attack. Verse 16. While he was still speaking, another messenger came. Bad news. Verse 17, while he was still speaking, another messenger came with bad news. Verse 18, while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house when suddenly a mighty wind swept from the desert and struck the four corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. At this, Job gets up and tears his robe. He shaves his head, then he falls to the ground in worship. This is a better guy than I am. This is not the kind of news that befalls me easily. Very recently, in fact, earlier this morning, I got some bad news. Not ultra bad, but it was the kind of news that was really bothering me. And all of my family are still living. But my blinders were on. It's all I could see there for a few moments. I was locked in. But not Job. Job apparently has a different perspective than sometimes I'm capable of. Falls to the ground in worship, and he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In this, Job did not say anything charging God with wrongdoing. I do wonder, though, if Job truly understood what God is about. Because there is this little line that Job says. He says, God gives and God takes away. Now, I do believe that God does give things. And I do believe that God does take away things. But my question is, where was God's hand in the destruction of Job's family and of his livelihood? Believe me, there are things I don't need in my life, and I need the Lord to take them away. You know, my father-in-law, Pastor Fred, I've heard him say many times, the Lord just has not seen fit to test me with riches. I don't know. If I had a ton of riches, it might be a better thing for me to just kind of be right on the edge of doing okay all the time versus having a lot of money that I could go crazy with. So I know the Lord does give and the Lord does take away, but what about this massive mountain of suffering that Job is going through? So does the story end there? Job 2. On another day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present themselves before him. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Does this sound familiar? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth on it. And then here we go again. Now, Job seemed like he was holding his ground before. Even if maybe I'm not sure he totally understood, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Well, let's talk about the Lord gives and the Lord takes away for a second. If you would turn with me to James 1:13-15, there seems to be a slightly different perspective on temptation, on the things that we go through that try us to our very core. Here, James says, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desires he is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. Now, when I read James, I see that God is not even a part of temptation. Temptation is the natural course of choices that we make, of influences that seem to have nothing to do specifically with God, and maybe it's just a thing that's set in motion. You know, if you kick the wall hard enough with your toe will break. That's not a mystery. That's just the facts. Certain things that we do bring on certain things to us. James points this out. But Job, again, God gives and God takes away. How about Corinthians? What's Corinthians say about it? 10:13. First Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has seized you except what is common to man. Well, first I want to take a moment just to talk about that. Do you guys realize that so often we feel like we're alone? Like that nobody else gets it? But the truth of the matter is and really, maybe nobody has gone through the exact situation that you're going through. But we all know how it feels to be down and out, or hurt, or lonely, or sad, or tempted. We have all this in common. There's no temptation that is not common to us all. We get it. We understand this portion of it. But God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted. Does he do the tempting? He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under the temptation. Now, that's interesting. God allows me to be tempted. Why would God allow me to be tempted? Is that a fair question to ask? Why would God do that to me? All things considered, if he knew that temptation could be something that I would crumble under, why would he even let me go through it? And then why would he take me just to the edge? Does it need to be powerful enough for me to remember it? Maybe. Do we need to know? Do we need to learn to trust in God that no matter how bad it seems, he will keep us from crumbling completely under the pressure of whatever it is we're going through? Back to Job. Job 2. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Satan, where have you been? I've been roaming around the earth. Oh, well then, thank you for making that good point. Have you considered Job? You know, I mean, is this like a Panera Bread, I love Atlanta conversation? I'm not sure how God's mind took him there. You know, when I would read this, I'm like, how are these things related? Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on the earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you enticed me against him to ruin him without any reason. Enticed. Now that was interesting, right? The devil enticed the Lord to allow Job to be ruined. That was a little part of the Bible that I didn't understand. And we'll get to at the time when I feel like I started to understand this concept. And so, skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life. So now the devil's making a new argument. When you're blessed, of course everything's going to be, of course you're going to be upright and blameless and a good guy and reaching out to your community and taking care of your kids. That's what happens when you have a hedge of protection around you. But a man will give all he has for his own life. And so stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. So Satan is really questioning Job's integrity here, right? The motivation for which he serves God and is a good person and is upright and does penance for his children and takes care of the people around him. Satan is questioning these motivations. And so God says this. Very well. He is in your hands, but you must spare his life. Oh man, it just seems like there's a lot that can go wrong. If all you're doing is sparing the life, Lord, and what kind of parameter is this, God of love? What kind of parameter is this? So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. Finally, his wife couldn't take it anymore. Ladies, you know how this goes. You've seen your guy go through something, and your heart is breaking for him. You want it to stop. You don't like the circumstances, and so I believe with maybe good intention, but unfortunately, and Job points it out, ignorantly, his wife gives him some advice. Are you still holding on to your integrity? She says. Just curse God and die. I can't even bear to see you continue to go through this. Job, boy, he's got some real, he has got some real focus. And he uses a line here that I've used many times, I'm just kidding. He replies, "Hey, you are talking foolish, woman. Shall we," and here I wonder, does Job really understand God? Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? So on the one hand, I do agree that we can't just go through life letting good times and trouble dictate who we are. It's probably a good idea to be the same person, to have the same commitments, the same integrity, the same love for our family, the same work ethic, whatever it is, no matter whether things are going good or whether things are going rotten. That's probably a good idea. But when things are not going well, especially when we're doing our best to be upright and blameless, is this the right perspective? Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So now, as many of us know, we're in our situation, whatever it is. And situations can be rough. Some of us have gone through trials like this. We've lost family members, both metaphorically speaking and physically. Some of us have lost great friends due to an argument or a separation in a home because a husband and wife can no longer get along anymore. We've gone through things that are painful. And so the friends show up to encourage Job. When Job's three friends, I'm not going to go with the names there, they heard about all his troubles. Just insert three of your friends here. They heard about his troubles that had come upon him. They set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. By the way, do you ever find these Old Testament behaviors kind of funny? I can't remember the last time I got so upset or felt so bad for somebody that I ripped my clothes and threw dust on my face. I guess, I don't know. But they felt bad for him. They sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. That's some dedicated friends. Job, we feel bad for you. We're here for you. What do we need to do? We sat on the ground. We'll sit on the ground with you 7 days, 7 nights. And no one said a word because they saw how great his suffering was. I have to admit, these are pretty good friends. I don't know, are we that good of friends? Are we willing to take whatever time we need to take with people? And sometimes it's just being there for them. Sometimes people just need to not be alone when they're going through something that's awful. And they can't explain it, and they don't know why it's happening, and they're questioning their beliefs, and they're questioning God, and some people are giving them advice like give up. Sometimes we just have to be there for people. Well, then Job speaks. And I've just kind of outlined here the first couple of chapters. We're not going to read them word for word, but in Job 3 there, Job can't believe, he kind of just putting a little synopsis on it, Job cannot believe that his life is in any way better right now than if he had just never been born. You ever felt like that? Can you relate to that? You've been through something, or you're seeing something, or you're feeling something with a kid, or a relationship, or parents, or whatever it is. How can life be any better now than if I had just not been born? And Job is wishing he was dead. Chapter 3. So chapter 4, his friends respond. Now that Job has spoken, his friends will respond with all kinds of hilarious wisdom. I'm telling you, if you've never read the book of Job, just read it and pretend like you're there in the circle around the fire with one of these deep conversations. In 4, his buddy speaks. He asks permission to speak. He's like, now that you've spoken, can I please say something here? He explains that tough times are God trying to correct us. So he felt like he had the same perspective that Job did, that God is trying to correct us in these times. Then he reads on, those who remain faithful, though, are rewarded in the end. Job, I know it's tough now, but just keep pressing forward. You'll be okay. How many of us have given that advice before? Right? We give that advice. People have given that advice to us. That's standard advice. His buddy tries to explain why bad things happen. Well, this is why they happen. So in chapter 6, Job expresses that there is now no joy in his life and that he is powerless to help himself. Job was a rich man, right? Could have done a lot of things for himself, but now he has no resources to even help himself. So his friend's advice fell on deaf ears. You guys ever had a conversation with somebody where you feel like you're giving great sound advice, and it is clear they are not hearing a word you are saying? Julie, come on now. So Job says, listen, I'm powerless to help myself. And then he starts to go off on his friends. After the advice his friends just gave, Job says, hey, other people can rely on their friends. Like, bad people can rely on their friends. But me, I'm a good guy, and these are the kind of friends I have. That when the weather's good, you guys are awesome friends. But when the weather isn't good, you guys are like a dry brook. He's calling his own friends fair weather friends as they sit in the circle with him. Friends who have sat in silence with him for 7 days and 7 nights. You guys are fair weather friends. He says, my friends are useless. They don't even understand me. And then he launches into some more self-pity. My life stinks. I can't imagine what this life is worth for me now. And he asks the question, why is God so interested in humanity? Why is he so immersive in our lives if he treats us like this? Man, these are tough questions that this biblical individual is talking about. Questions that I know some of us in this room have asked. Probably all of us at some point in this room have asked. So then his other friend speaks. He says, why are you going on and on about this? Why are you still complaining, his friend says. Your children suffered the natural consequence of their sin. Man, that's a tough one to hear. That may be true, but that's what he tells them. Your kids are dead because of their lifestyle. Dang, that's tough. We heard a sermon at camp meeting, for those of you who were there, where we were warned that when we hear of a great tragedy, sometimes some people will come, and I don't know if it's for comfort or if it's just in an endeavor to be right, they will explain why this happened because of the bad that this person was doing. And that may be true, I don't know, but I'm not sure it's good to say when somebody's suffering. But your children have suffered as a natural consequence of your sin. He goes on, he reasons with Job that if he continues, though, to be faithful and cling to God and does not trust fragile things like spider webs, he lists all this kind of stuff. Don't trust fragile things for stability. God will reward you in the end. And there we are, back to our, this is not groundbreaking advice here. These are the things we say to one another, and we encourage one another. Job recognizes, he goes on, that God is beyond understanding. As they sit around the fire, God is just too big for me to understand. Job asks, what can I do in any situation? He says, I am helpless to understand God's ways. He feels that the situation is totally unjustified because he is trying to live and believes he's living this blameless life. He can't see. And so then he asks in verse 9:24, he asks this little question. He kind of admits that maybe his perspective on God isn't totally correct. Because he says, in this last little line, he said, if it is not he doing all this, then who is it? If it's not God, then who is it? So we see a guy that was pretty sure God is mad at him. God's teaching him. God's doing something. But now he's like, well, maybe I don't get it. Maybe I don't understand. Is God doing this? But if it's not him, who is it? So Job, he's frustrated now by his own question. He thinks God is unreasonable. And because he is God, Job feels like he can't reason to him. He says it, man, like a friend, I could reason with them face to face. We could talk together. I could say my point. They could say their point. But this is God. I can't do that. If only there was somebody to mediate the situation, Job said. Couldn't there be somebody that could come in and help us communicate with one another? So Job again reminds everybody around, Job hates his life now and points out the inconsistencies in his story. Why good things happen to bad people, and why, of all people, this good guy, bad things are happening to him. He wants to know what he needs to change. Lord, please just tell me, what do I need to do different to get out of this? Have we ever been there before? Have we ever been in a situation where we feel so low, we're just saying, I'll do whatever I can to fix this? So then his third friend calls him out. We're not going to go through all the conversation, but I wanted to touch the first three portions of the conversation. His other friend calls him out for being sarcastic. Because Job did. He got quite sarcastic there in 10, right at the end here. Anyways, we don't have to read into that. I just wanted you to hear about it. So he calls out, why are you being so sarcastic? Why are you being so hateful to us? He agrees. He points out that it's hard to understand God. Then he suggests that Job might not be as pure and upright as he thinks. There's a good friend. At least he's being honest, I guess. So, Job, if you correct your ways, your future will be bright. Then Job sarcastically responds in 12:1-6, and I just want to read this because it's hilarious. This is funny dialogue. He says, then Job replied, doubtless you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. He's telling his friends, you think you're the only smart people in the world here. But I have a mind as well. I'm not inferior to you. Who does not know all the things that you're telling me? You guys are already telling me things I know. I have become a laughingstock to my friends. Though I called upon God, and he answered. A mere laughingstock, though I was righteous and blameless. Men at ease have contempt for misfortune, as the fate of those whose feet are slipping. The tents of marauders are undisturbed. The lives of people whose lives are terrible, that their life is good. And those who provoke God are secure. Those who carry God in their hands. Job is so frustrated right now with God. He doesn't understand suffering. He doesn't understand what's happening to his life. And if you continue to read through Job, their conversation continues in this circular way. Job complains. He's upset. He doesn't like it. He says this stuff. Then his friends come back. No, be more positive. You're going to be fine. Well, actually, you might not be fine. I mean, just the kind of conversation that you would expect over 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours around a campfire. Seamlessly transitioning through all kinds of little concepts and details. But do we still understand God? We read in Isaiah that God's people would go into exile because of their behavior. The devil made this interesting point in Job. He says, you have built a hedge around Job. If you remove that hedge, Job will curse you. Is it possible sometimes, too, that we remove the hedge ourselves? See, God knows how his people are. There in Isaiah, he prophesies that they will go into exile because of the way they are living. But I don't believe God is a God of exile. Would you agree that it is or is not his plan to lead his own people into exile? So I have a question here. Does God withdraw his hedge of protection because the way we live sometimes forces him to? Maybe like the prodigal son, does he realize that the only way for us to recognize his great justice and love is to spend some time serving a master that is only trying to kill us? As I read the Bible, I believe that I read of a God of love who was willing to sacrifice himself to build us up. And I believe I also read the story of a Satan who is willing to sacrifice us to build himself up. So there's the one question. Does God sometimes withdraw his hedge because sometimes the way we live, we ask him to? We don't need your protection, Lord, and we're going to put ourselves in situations that put us at high risk. There's one more question I want to ask, and I feel like I have a little better understanding of this. Maybe 3 or 4 months ago, Pastor Chris had a sermon. He was talking about something different, but he brought us to Job, where he talked about the culture of kings and the culture of rulers. And he brought us to this section where all the angels meet together, and Satan shows up, and God says, Satan, where have you come from? And Satan says, I have come from the earth, from roaming to and forth all over the whole earth. And then he went on to explain that the language of the day was that rulers expressed their dominion over something if they could put their foot on it. And so Satan's claim to God was this: I have come from the place where everything belongs to me. See, Satan started this argument by saying the earth is all mine. I get to wander on it. I get to put it all under my foot. And God says, not just throwing Job under the bus, but defending what belongs to him, says, actually, have you considered Job? Job is not yours. He is blameless and he is upright. Now, he hadn't done so yet. But eventually God knew that not only were certain people his now because they chose to be his, but God would also come to this earth and die on a cross to purchase them back. So that it could be painfully obvious. He did it through pain, through suffering, that it could be painfully obvious that if anyone wanted to be his, all they had to say is, yes, I've already been purchased. I do belong to God. And so he says, have you considered my servant Job? He's blameless. He's upright. This is a great man. And in fact, he does not belong to you. So don't come into our meeting of angels and tell me that everything belongs to you, because it doesn't. And now I realize that actually Job is the one who picked this argument. God didn't just throw Job under the bus. God said, actually, you are not going to claim what is yours when it's actually mine. The thing about it is I believe we are in a spiritual warfare. And though suffering on a lot of levels is a mystery, I do believe that sometimes there are similar conversations that go on. Has it ever occurred to you that maybe the poor things that are happening in your life don't have anything to do with God bringing them on you? But instead, maybe a conversation went like this. Actually, have you considered Amasita? Actually, have you considered Ed Blackerby? Don't come into our meeting, Satan, and tell me all of it is yours. Actually, have you considered Paulo Laguna? I believe we deal with a personal God who is not in the business of suffering, but he is in the business of making it clear who belongs to him. And whenever he makes that clear, the devil will challenge it. Satan will challenge it, and he will start to try to prove why we don't belong to God. Have you considered the deceivers? Have you considered my servant Ron? Have you considered Brandon? Have you considered that you actually don't own what is mine? As I began to read things in the light of what Chris pointed out, I realized that God has not just run us through the ringer when it comes to this earth, but he does want to make it clear who belongs to him. And so I'm hoping today we can take a new perspective, even if it's only a small perspective, on suffering, on the things that we go through, and recognize that it's not God's fault that we suffer. But in the same way that it would be unfair to force us to do good, it would also be unfair for him to not respect Satan's claims and allow him to prove. And so here we are, and I'm not saying it's awesome, but I'm glad I get a shot. And so I encourage you to remember that when you go through suffering, maybe it's not the proof that God has withdrawn from you and you are no longer his, but maybe it in fact is the proof that God is claiming you. I saw it here on the cabinet today, remnants of a sermon from 2 or 3 weeks ago. You are the one. You are the one that God is seeking to prove right now belongs to him. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, I know suffering is a big topic, and sometimes when we get ourselves into a position where we're going through personal suffering, it's very difficult to see the perspectives. It's very difficult to keep our minds focused on what really might be happening behind the scenes. But Lord, I just pray that when we go through things in our lives, we recognize that it's not you trying to tear us down, but in fact, it's you seeking to claim what is rightfully yours. You purchased us. And so, Lord, I just pray that you would give us that perspective. That whatever situation we find ourselves in, we're the same person, committed to you because we know that you claim us. We love you, Lord. In your name, amen.